Assalamu alaikum. This is Professor Wanim again. Happy to meet with you for the third time. If you remember, our last session, we have covered the topic of chapter 1, managers in the workplace. We have covered 5 main points of the chapter. We started with clarifying the importance of management to different organization, regardless of the organization type or size or location or whatever. Then we move to explain who managers are and their functions and the 3 levels of management: top, middle, first or lower level management. Then we cover the skills, the 3 different skills: conceptual, human, and technical skills required for anyone who needs to be a manager. Then we cover the several functions: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. These are the 4 universal functions of managers. Also the roles and the skills required of managers. Then we move to discuss the factors that are reshaping and redefining the managerial function in the 21st century, from the importance of customers, importance of innovation, sustainability, and so on. And finally, we have discussed the value of studying management at all levels, whether your personal, individual level, or the business level, or even the whole country level. Today, move to an important topic, I believe, which is the history of management. This is found in the module, the annex of chapter 1. And at this session today, we're gonna take you in a journey to help you understand when and how management evolved as a science, when and how management became a science, so we can teach and you can study now how this started and evolved throughout years since the early days of the 20th century, 1900s, then how we moved throughout the years up till now. We gonna discuss several approaches to management. So you realize that management is not the current practice of management, but there are old and middle range and recent modern models of management. Let's start with this. Let me share this with you here. Okay, that's it. Management history. So let me show you this figure. Okay, just a second. Okay. Figure actually present the whole different models, starting with the practice of management, and this refers to the early models in management where the author provides us with some very old, even before BC, before Christ. The first example was the pyramids, our Egyptian pyramids. So proudly, we present this as an example of management because nobody can imagine a huge building like this has been built without management. Definitely, they needed some kind of management in order to ensure that everything was in place. Definitely, they needed someone to coordinate the efforts of thousands of workers and several other functions, coordinate the effort of all of them in order to come up with that huge building that has been through all these years and still there for everybody to see and enjoy it. It has been said that it took them 20 whole years, 20 whole years to have the pyramids built. Throughout these long years, definitely they have needed a good manager in order to supervise or lead or control all the efforts of those people who participated in this nice building. So, for this example, it has been illustrated that definitely that was management. It was management there. This building, nobody think that this building has been built this way without management. The other ancient example to the Chinese Great Wall. Also, again, this is a huge building, so definitely needed good management to do it. Then the author wants to tell us that also Adam Smith, that was in 1776. Adam Smith, the great economist, introduced to us a concept called division of labor. Division of labor, where everybody has its own specialty, everybody specializes in certain tasks. For what reason? This increase productivity, increase production. If you specialize in some task, definitely you will know how to do it very well. And the result is you give us higher productivity. After that, the authors started to present 4 different models of management. Let's start with the classical approaches to management. where we have major categories of contribution to management. First, it was called scientific management. Scientific management. Definitely, we cannot talk about scientific management without referring to two great examples. Frederick Taylor from one side and the Galbraith. Mr. Galbraith and his wife Lillian, a psychologist that also has contributed to management very much. Let's talk first about Frederick Taylor, and is called the father of scientific management. The father of scientific management, because he was the first one to study, repeat, to study management and provide us with some scientific method for management. Frederick Taylor was supervising workers while they were doing work and noticed that everybody does what he wants to do. There is no unified work. There is no analyzed, studied, scientifically presented method for workers to do their job. So they wasted time. Productivity was very low. Frederick Taylor, who was an engineer, started in 1911, wrote a book of scientific method. He put some principles. Let me show you some of the principles of scientific management here. Yes, Taylor's scientific management principles. Look at this. One, develop a science for each element. That's where management became a science. Develop a science for each element, and individuals will replace the old rule of thumb method. Everybody was doing what he wants to do his own way. Everybody was doing his own way. No. Frederick Taylor replaced this by his very famous concept called the best way. The one best way. In Taylor's point of view, that every task to be done efficiently, has to be done in one way, and this way was the way. Right? Secondly, Frederick Taylor told us scientifically select and then train, teach, and develop the worker. Now focus the attention of managers, workers, to select and train and keep developing the skills of the worker. Sharpen the skills of the workers. Then Frederick Taylor also tried to help workers ensure that all work is done in accordance with the scientific way. Managers should have good control on workers and make sure they follow the scientific one best way that he has talked about. Also, Taylor told us to divide work between managers who has their own functions and workers who has their own functions. Then, Frederick Taylor, when he insists on the one best way, that was a new concept that has been introduced to management at that time. But lately, as we go through the chapter, we will see that this one best way, his one best way, has been criticized enormously later on. Also, the Galbraith. Okay. Galbraith, Mr. Galbraith and his wife, the psychologist, when they heard Frederick Taylor told about scientific management, Galbraith introduced a very important concept to management, called time and motion study. Whereas they introduced to us a new technique called theraplex. Notice that theraplex is the opposite spelling of their name. Did you notice that? Yes. And this technique is talking about analysis of the worker's motion, the worker's movement, his hands movement, his body movement, and so on. They analyze this using a specific device that was they have been invented, that device, to measure the time each movement the workers did. Then they analyzed this movement and tried to alternatively offer a better way to do the job. They try to give us, try to minimize, let us say, minimize the number and the length of each movement, so that if the workers, for example, has taken 20 different movements, hands and body movements, and it took him, let's say, 10 minutes to do the job. Galbraith helped workers to minimize the number of movements to the minimum, and consequently minimize the time taken. So the result is definitely increasing productivity. For example, if a worker takes 10 minutes to produce one pen, like that, 10 minutes. So how many pens he can produce in 1 hour? Only 6. 60 seconds here, and give us 6. Right? 60 minutes, I mean. But 60 by 10 gives you output of 6. If we train the workers and help the workers minimize the time to 6 minutes, let us say 6 minutes. Now, how many pens he can produce in 1 hour? Divide 60 by 6, Now the output, the production increased from 6 to 10. So we increased the production by 4% more than he used to do, and so on. So this method definitely has led to increasing productivity. And one other thing which is really important, minimize the workers' fatigue. Why? Because we minimize the effort unnecessarily the workers used to do. Okay, this part talking about scientific management, Frederick Taylor, Galbraith. Now let's move to another attempt to develop management. Now let's go up to management, from workers and the workshop, from the floor to management. We're talking now about general administrative management, or general administrative theory. And also, let's talk about two efforts here. First, Henry Fayol. Henry Fayol was a French engineer. Frederick Taylor was an American engineer. And here, Henry Fayol is a French engineer. And he also provided us with very important principles for management. Many of them still valid up to now, up to this moment. And many managers use some of these principles. Let me move here to show you examples of the principles of management provided by Henry. 14 principles for example, division of work, or we talked about Adam Smith. Authority, yes. Authority, he talks about authority from one side and response from another side. He defined authority, the right to others. Then he told us, very importantly, authority should equal responsibility, and do not give someone authority without responsibility. Don't give someone authority without holding him responsible for what he's supposed to do. Why? It has been said correctly that absolute authority corrupts absolutely. This means that if you give someone authority and you don't hold him or her responsible for that, he or she will get corrupted. Absolute authority corrupts absolutely. Means in Arabic, السلطة المطلقة مفسدة مطلقة. So that principle in management is very important, introduced by Henry Fayol. Look at unity of command principle. I'm not going to go over the 14th principle, but I'm just picking examples. Unity of command. Unity of command means each worker, each employee at any level should report to only one boss. Each one in the company or any organization should report, should be responsible before only one manager. Why? Because in our Egyptian saying, المركب اللي فيها رئيسين بيحصل لها ايه؟ Definitely تغرق. In this case كل واحد لازم يكون له only واحد. This means unity of command. Let us see some other examples here. Okay. So another one who also, let me share this again with you. Centralization. Again, this one important example of the 14 principles offered by FAYOL'S. Centralization means concentrating authority in someone's hand. The opposite of centralization is decentralization. Decentralization means a delegation of authority to some subordinates. Yes, it is important to use centralization in at one time, and use the opposite, decentralization in another time. Scalar chain means the line of authority flow up from the top to the next levels of management. السلطة بتيجي من فوق لتحت, right? Maybe these are the major. Of course, we're not going to go over all the 14th of them. So let us move next to another scientist who introduced also a good part of the development of managerial theory called bureaucracy. This concept has been introduced by a German sociologist this time. Sociologist. Remember that we are talking here about some engineers, some psychologists, some sociologists. This is how management has been developed. Management has borrowed principles from different disciplines, several other disciplines. And what I just mentioned are just few examples. Max Weber, it is said Weber. Max Weber is written by W, but you should, when you want to say, should pronounce by as a V, Max Weber. Introduce one very important critical principle for management: bureaucracy. This is how you build the structure of any organization. However, currently bureaucracy has a bad reputation. Some people bureaucracy with a bad connotation. They call it, they equate bureaucracy with red tape. Red tape means in Arabic, I will come to it. red tape اللي هو بطء الإجراءات، الروتين. Yes, red tape translate into routine. Many people hate routine because of بطء العمل, and they believe it came from bureaucracy. However, in reality, bureaucracy is a good way for building structure, defining relationships between organization, so that work is not built in personal the conceit of this, but he insists let us put rules and regulations, so work should be done based on personal relationships. That was a very nice concept as a matter of fact, but unfortunately in practice this turned out to be a bad concept. Let's go to this figure. Move to the second model of management is called now this model comes from actually this is it's better to start next. Behavioral approach. After the classical approach and a strict following of the principles of scientific management. In 1927, Western Electric, a large American corporation, started with the cooperation of Harvard scholar called Elton Mayo, a series of experiments has been known as Hawthorne, whatever you want to pronounce it, studies. Hawthorne or Hawthorne studies. This was a series of experiments on work environment. Okay. It's natural to expect that if you dim the light, قلل الإضاءة. For example, to dim the light or increase the light, make the room very bright. This supposedly is expected to influence the level of productivity. There is a linear positive relationship with the amount of light. Less light, it's expected that amount of production could be less. If more light, it's expected that the amount of production should be more. Isn't it logical? Yes, it is logical. But to your surprise and their surprise too, sometimes they found no linear relationship. Out of this series, I'm not going to go into details of these experiments, but what's important to refer to here is the principles that has been discovered out of this series of experiments. What is the importance human factor? Again, the importance of human. What the opposite of scientific management? Of machines to the extent that they looked at workers as a machine. They design and they try to control the movement of his hand and body, the time of every single thing. This was quite the opposite of a behavioral approach. We have several people participated in developing this approach. So let me mention some early contributors. Some people like Robert Owen, like Mary, one important scholar, Chester Bernard. Those was that was an example of some people who actually contribute approach. They contribute to this behavioral approach, but let's focus on the important effort, the important contribution in this approach. So let's talk here about Elton Mayo and his contribution. But he turned our attention the results of the series of experiments of Elton Mayo and his team in collaboration with Western Electric. This experiment lasted for about 5 years, from 1927 up to 1932, right? So the results of this series of experiments led to the involvement of what you study this year, the organizational behavior. The organizational behavior came out of Hawthorne series of experiments, which focuses on the importance of the human psychology and the human sociology. I mean the psychology and sociology of individual workers, groups, and because sometimes the pressure of the group of the fellow workers lead to influence the productivity of individual workers, right? Okay, now let's go to this quantitative approach. Actually, in this approach prevailed in the period from 1950s to the 1950s, where management has borrowed again, in addition to borrowing principle from engineering, from sociology, from psychology. Management has borrowed techniques and approaches and theories from quantitative sciences, quantitative techniques like mathematics, um, like operation research, and statistics, and so on. All these are quantitative methods. Management also used many of these disciplines in order to develop management. For example, one branch of management called OR, or operation research, where you're going to study a course on operation research in your senior years, in the 4th year, inshallah. This quantitative approach helped management to develop some techniques in managing several things. As an example, best management, or better manage your resources, where operation research help managers specify certain amounts of resources, different types of resources, in order to maximize the objective, being, for example, a profit. As an example, to maximize your profit, you need to optimally use your different of resources. One important contribution to management is called total quality management. This is a recent contribution to management by Edward Demings. Again, this is a German scientist who helped providing some new concepts to management called total quality management, TQM, total quality management, where management can use some quantitative techniques to measure everything, so that to improve management. And also, one important principle here is continuous improvement. Improve everything and continually improve everything. Let me, for example, show you some principles what has total quality has introduced to us. Look at this. Intense focus on the customer. Remember, chapter 1 in the last session, we told you that one of the factors that are reshaping, redefining management, customer. Now, again, total quality management stress the importance of customer. Why? Because, as we said before, if there were no customer out there willing and able to buy your products, you will be out of business. As simple as this. You will be out of business. So you should be very careful and take care of your customer. Not try wrongly to use or to manipulate the customer. Right? Also, as I was saying, focus on continuous improvement. This is a major principle in management, and especially in total quality management. Improve everything and keep improving, because there is always room for improvement. There is always a room for improvement. Focus on the process of doing the business. So what you can see here, the major 6 principles of total quality management, and they are all very useful in management and for better management. So if we go back to the figure here, this diagram, let's move to the most recent approach to management. That's called contemporary approaches. Basically, we have 2 approaches: the system approach and the contingency approach. The system approach, let me show you this. Okay, here we are. This figure, okay, come on. Yes, this figure shows you that management, as a matter of fact, can be looked at based on this new concept to management, the system approach. Systems are cut into 2, closed and open systems. But as a matter of fact, in the time being, we should look at all organizations as open system. Open means open to the environment. Every organization is a one unit, the organization and the environment around it. The environment. Remember, in our first lecture, I referred to environment as inside and outside the organization environment. Local environment within the company, inside the company, and outside the company, you might refer to the environment outside the company, but still within the country, and also the global environment. In the figure you see now, open system means, and if this is the organization, for example, an industrial company, it has inputs, resources, in other words, where you get resources from environment, isn't it? You get these resources, whether they are raw materials, human resources, technology, and so on. You get all these resources from your environment. Then transform them into some kind of product. Then deliver these products, whatever they are, in terms of output, to environment again. Get resources from environment, do some processes on them, transfer them into some useful kind of product, then again deliver it to environment, get paid for this, then get feedback again into the input resources again. Look at this. If you are in a textile, for example, what do you get from environment around the company? You get raw material, cotton or wool or whatever. You got workers, human resources. You got capital to buy machines and so on. You got technology, how to do it. Then you got information. Put them all together, mix them in one way or another, using some production technology in order to produce output. Output in this case, in terms of product, some clothes, some bed sheets, some many other examples of products. Financial results, you may make profit or loss if you are not lucky. Again, some information and some human effects on the workers, on the people in the environment. Then we get again feedback for a next round of the production. This organization, for example, was our school, our college. We get resources from the environment. We get students, we get some materials, maybe it's not raw, but some kind of material. We got some computers, we got some data shows, we got some boards, we got some many other different materials. We got some money from somewhere, some from government, some from many other. We get the technology, teaching and technology and so on, and information. Then we work on you, our students, somehow to transfer you and provide our society with our graduates after transforming you to be a good product to help yourself, your family, and your country. But we don't make profit out of the process because we are non-for-profit organization and so on. So this is an example of open system. So in this approach, we better look at organizations as open systems. So this is another example of the most recent approaches to management. So finally, the second recent approach called the contingency approach. Contingency approach, where the method of management. Remember the one best way of Frederick Taylor? Here, there's no one best way. It's quite the opposite now. It's quite the opposite. We say the method differ the way you manage your business should differ based on some situations or contingencies. These contingencies oftentimes require different ways of management. Here are some examples of factors that influence your method of management. There is a list of some. Organization size. Managing small organizations should differ than managing larger organizations. The managing method. Please don't confuse the universal managerial functions with what we are saying here. One, planning. I told you that planning among the four functions that are all universal. So Planning is a universal function, but the way to do it, the scope of planning, the type of planning, the length of planning, the factors you consider when you do some planning maybe differ from small organizations to larger organizations based on the organization size. That's why we say organization size is a contingency variable. This is to say that the managing methods should be contingent upon your size. Again, the type of technology, environmental factors, whether you are certain or uncertain about environmental factors. But the reality is nothing is certain right now in the complex environment. Environment is becoming complex, especially in the globalization era. So uncertainty is the prevailing condition right now. Again, certainty or uncertainty is a contingent factor, whereas your management method should be based upon. Once again, we stress the importance of individual differences. Management method differ from one individual manager to another. Managers differ in everything, including their psychology. When we come to study the next chapter, the decision making, we'll see all the examples of biases and sometimes of the decision because of the influence of individual difference, because of the influence of individuals, psychology or sociology or whatever individual factors here. Good. Now we finished this part. I'd like to ask you questions now. Let's review. Can you describe some early management examples? Yes, definitely you can. The Egyptian, Chinese, Adam Smith, and so on. Can you explain the various theories in the classical approach? Definitely you can. Taylor, Galbraith, Henry Fayol, Max Weber, the German scientist, and so on. And also, let's see, can you discuss the development and uses of the behavioral approach? Definitely yes. Now, based on the knowledge I offered in this lecture and the OB you studied with Dr. Omran's, Dr. Omran's, definitely you can talk about this and the contribution of this to management. Can you describe a quantitative approach and how math, statistics, operational research help management, and especially the total quality management, which stresses improvement and continuous improvement? I hope so. Finally, can you explain the various theories in the contemporary approach? Actually, two theories, the system approach and the contingency approach. I hope you enjoyed this, and now you are knowledgeable enough about how management started as a science to the extent that now I can teach and you can study, became a science, and how management was developed throughout years up till now. Currently, the most current approach with contingency approach. Good luck and see you later. Assalamu alaikum. Stop.